Hello.
Hi there, this is Peter from Field Music here. I'm nicely distorted on my entirely authentic Sony Walkman from 2009, which I used to record all my demos. Anyway, thanks to the team and to the listeners, Two Big Egos in Small Car, for making Limits of Language their #1 album of the year. It means a lot to us, as I know you're all very discerning album enthusiasts, and it means a lot especially since our latest LP is a bit of a departure for us. Anyway, thanks very much, and hope you can come and hear us play the new stuff live on our tour in February, which actually we might name Two Big Egos and the rest of the band in a small van. Thanks now, bye.
We are delighted tonight to have as our guest Rob Chapman, writer, author, music journalist, and it is an absolute pleasure to welcome you. Ironically, we're actually going to start just by briefly mentioning a thank you to us, which sounds like we're bigging ourselves up. This has come about because of Graham's choice of his album of the year by Field Music. We thank you earlier, and Peter, for the interview that he did with us. So welcome back, Rob, and introducing you, a considerable arts writer. And this is a history of writing, starting off, I think, initially with music journalist for Mojo magazine and member of the post-punk band Glaxo Babies in the late 1970s, subsequently writing 2008 first novel Dusk Music, Flambard Press, 2011 Syd Barrett, A Very Irregular Head for Faber and Faber, and that was the first authoritative and exhaustively researched biography of Syd Barrett, followed in 2015 by Psychedelia and Other Colours, again Faber and Faber, Pop Culture and History, Chapman exploring in comprehensive detail the history, precedence and cultural impact of LSD on music in the USA and the UK. 2021, the lyrics of Syd Barrett, Omnibus Press, and now the book that we're going to focus on tonight, 2024, Unsung, Unsaid, Syd and Nick in Absentia, self-published book, moving fictional account of the declines of Nick Drake and Syd Barrett, in which the two enigmatic cult musicians meet in the summer of 1974. Now, can I say at this point, I don't want to call this an obsession with Syd Barrett, Rob. That would be unfair. Let's just put it as, what is so fascinating about Syd Barrett?
I don't think obsession comes into it, actually, when you write a novel. I think you have to detach yourself from fandom.
Yeah.
Completely. But I mean, in terms of Syd, well, I heard the Pink Floyd when I was 12, along with all the other groups that came along at that sort of stage, and Arnold Lane was one of the records, and I liked him from then on. I liked the Pink Floyd, I liked his solo records, and I followed his career ever since. Like, it doesn't make me unique, a lot of people have done that. But the novel came from somewhere else entirely. The novel wasn't coming from fandom. In fact, I think I had to pretty much sort of unlearn a lot of my fan approach in order to write it as a work of fiction, because I had to get inside their heads in a completely different way. Him and Nick Drake, actually. So, the fandom is separate from a well-researched, not the only book on Syd Barrett, by the way. There have been several others. But no, fandom doesn't come into it. I completely deconstructed all that in order to write the book and take it somewhere else, because I'm actually, it sounds like a jaded thing to say, but I'm kind of post-journalism now, really. I'm kind of done with being a music writer, which is just as well, because nobody ever wants to employ me as a music writer anyway. So I've gone into my little kind of niche corner, really, where nobody wanted to publish the book, and I knew I'd written a decent piece of work there, and I knew its audience would be out there somewhere, which has been proven actually by the sales, because I mean it's approaching. Here we are at the end of the year, 12 months after it was published, and it's coming up to 650 sales now, which is a really good sale for a self-published book. Just to put that into context, most literary fiction, I only read this recently, average sales of literary fiction in first year is 172. Yes, it's
Wow.
Now, if that's the average,
Oh dear.
if that's the average, that means there's plenty of books selling far more than that, and there are plenty of books selling less than that, which is quite dispiriting,
Mm.
really, isn't it? But I
Uh,
think that
yeah.
Graham, your question.
Well, yeah. A Very Irregular Head, which obviously is about 13 years old now, was so highly regarded when it came out in Faber and Faber that even Gillian Cope said it was absolutely brilliant. And I can't understand why, having read Unsung, Unsaid, Syd and Nick and Absentia, I can't understand why it hasn't been published by Faber and Faber or White Rabbit or Omnibus Press or whoever, because I think it's a groundbreaking book and it's really ambitious and it's a great read and it's epic in its thoughts, but it's only 270 pages long. It's just an astounding book. I think it's one of the most important books about modern rock music ever written by a British writer.
Thank you so much. In fact, yeah, it's half the length of A Very Irregular Head is 140,000 words, and obviously that was a labor of love. This I was determined very early on that the work of fiction on them shouldn't outstay its welcome. So I deliberately made it short, and I deliberately aimed pretty much at 70,000. I'm a very unruly and undisciplined thinker, but I'm a very precise writer. So when it came to mapping the book out, I remember when I'd written about 38,000 words, thinking, right, I am just over halfway through this book now. I had that determined from very early on. This book wasn't going to go on and on forever. I had a finite number of chapters. I didn't want any two chapters to be the same, which they're not. I didn't want either of the ruminations about Syd or Nick just to be mirror images of each other. So, for example, I do Syd's childhood, but I don't do Nick's childhood. I do Nick's inner kind of voice, writing letters and things like that, and tape lessons, but I don't do that with Syd because I was determined that the book never repeats itself. I didn't want the reader at any stage to be going, "Oh, he's doing this again." I did think carefully about the reader and think how I wanted to bring them in. You've got to gain their trust and bring them with you. If you are inventing a fictitious Syd Barrett and a fictitious Nick Drake, who, I mean, have been mythologized enough as it is, I thought you've got to make them plausible, not just in terms of mimicking them, but actually making the reader think, yes, this could have happened. Or what some of the nicest things I've seen on the Amazon reviews have been where people, and more than one person said this, where they said, I had to keep pinching myself and thinking, oh no, this didn't actually happen. This is fiction. Because that means I did my job. That credits me with having blurred those boundaries so successfully, which was fully my intention. That's what I wanted to do. There were points where I would think, there were some points where I thought, God, I wish this had happened. Actually, this is great.
Yeah. Part of the genius of the book, though, is that when you make things up in it, and you're making them up for a good reason, you're trying to explain their characters and capture the milieu of the times and get inside their head. You're trying to bring everything alive off the page. But when you're doing that, you don't invent really fantastical, exciting events like them meeting at Top of the Pops or at the first Glastonbury Festival backstage or something. You have them meeting in a crappy little cafe in Kensington. So that's part of the genius of it. You don't over egg the pudding at any point.
Yeah, the drabscape, as I call it at one point in the book. Yeah, you've got to do the drabscape correctly. Well, that's it, exactly. I mean, you've hit upon all the things that I deliberately erase from my thoughts when I'm writing. For example, the words, you'll have seen this yourself, the words Pink Floyd are not mentioned once in the entire book. Not one. He refers a couple of times to the band or my band, but they are never mentioned. I never like to go the obvious route. And one of the things, I mean, everyone who knows me on social media will know that I bang on about bad biopics all the time. I really dislike bad biopics. And if at any point I ever felt myself... yeah, and if any, I know that's a whole other podcast, isn't it? Just that subject, yeah. But if there was this guiding voice in my head at all times that sort of alerted me, saying if at any point whatsoever you feel like you're drifting into that kind of, hey, Syd, look, a scarecrow, didn't you once write a song about, all that? then steer well clear of all of it. No cliches. And I hope I succeeded. I mean, if anyone can come to it with a critical eye and go, oh, well, I don't know, because you did that and that was a bit hackneyed, I'll say, well, I'll stand up and accept it, sort of thing. But that was my guiding thought all the time: avoid bad biopic writing. And as you said at the beginning, it was a great way of getting inside their heads and finding, I mean, I'm never quite entirely sure what metafiction means, but I like the idea of of reflecting on the actual reality, but doing it in a fictitious way. And you're quite right. There were points in the book where I thought, wow, I'm saying stuff about Syd here that I never said in A Very Irregular Head. I mean, the artist side of Syd, getting in, starting to see the world through the eyes of Syd the artist, and not Syd the musician, Syd the artist. Little bits like that, for example, they were huge fun to do. They really were.
One of the things that's interesting to learn from you is authors talk of voices taking over, the characters' voices taking over when they're writing, and sometimes actually steering then the future course of a book. Was that a case of this with you, so that you can explain to me, but whether, one puts aside any research that you knew already of Nick Drake's life, any research that you knew of Syd Barrett's life, and then let the storytelling take over?
Yes, that's a very good point. Well, there's about 3 very good points in that question.
Yeah.
To deal with the first one, it's almost a cliche, but writers do know when they're getting it right, where the character starts to write itself. Now with Syd, I found that particularly when I wrote those Syd songs, for example, in chapter 4, when I have a whole, because that's when I really decided to raise the bar at that point. Seriously, that was the point where I thought, if we're going to do this, let's raise the bar. Let's write Syd's songs in Syd's voice, and let's do them at each stage of his career as well. The crystalline early, nursery rhyme bounce, the later ragged freeform songs. Let's get all those voices correctly. And you're right, what you say in the initial premise there, because there would be 1 or 2 points where I would put a word in or a phrase into one of the songs and think, oh no, that's not a Syd phrase. No, that he wouldn't say that. And I knew once I was thinking like that I must be fairly successfully in there, because I was thinking like that and thinking, oh no, not a Syd word, not a Syd phrase. With Nick, you see, although I've done Syd's voice all my life, I internalized that kind of voice from very early on.
Yeah.
With Nick, you come to it a fresh in a way, because of course Nick wasn't vocal and garrulous and out there at all. He was quite the opposite. So you've got to find another way with Nick. Now, the gem, of course, was finding that on YouTube. I don't know if you've heard it, but there's that recording of him taped on his dad's tape recorder at about 4 a.m. when he gets back from a party.
Yeah.
And of course, he's got those impeccable upper middle class vowels. And he taught, and once I heard that, I thought, oh, right, I can get those speech patterns, because it is a kind of, I use the kind of Hugh Grant as the example, but it's a kind of, the kind of caricature of Hugh Grant as being that kind of, slightly, sort of, if one can talk in the third person about oneself, and one often thinks that, I suppose, that kind of thinking. And once I could get into that irregularity of those upper middle class speech patterns, and we've all known people like that anyway. I certainly have,
You're talking to one now, Rob.
Well, there you go. We all, yes, excuse me, we all went to college.
Don't include me in that.
No,
exactly. So that was easy to do. But you do raise some interesting points there about what you do with the character, and again, you just don't go the literal route. That's the way you do it. So, for example, when I have Nick choosing the cover versions, he's going to make an album of cover versions between Brighter Later and Pink Moon. It was again great fun thinking, well, what shall we have? Let's not just go Bert Jansch, and all the rest of it. Let's not go
Randy Newman.
Let's throw a few curveballs in there, like that Tony Bennett song, which does that. The orchestration on that does remind me of some of the orchestration on Nick's records, to such an extent I thought, I wonder if they had that album in the house. I wonder if Molly had that album.
Yeah, I always thought that John Wood's sound that he got with the strings for Nick Drake was very much like Frank Sinatra's September My Years album by Gordon Jenkins, very icy and sharp. Easy listening music would have been around.
I've never made that comparison myself, but I like the Jenkins stuff best, actually, that Sinatra did. There are all kinds of little bits and pieces there. You notice Delius occasionally. There are certain Bach things. John Dowland's Lacrimae. I've listened to them and thought, oh, that's there. He's done that little phrase, and you do hear them. And of course, the orchestrations would have been kind of like done with that in mind. They're very, very learned young people about their classical music. They weren't just
Yeah.
sitting around listening to folkers. Well, I doubt if Nick
Mm,
was sitting listening around to many folkers at all, actually, because it's quite clear he wasn't of that world. He was as much into
yeah.
jazz and North African music and and lots of other, bossa nova music, Latin American music. He was into a whole range of stuff. I don't like being reductionist about either of them. I mean, I wrote a piece for
Yeah.
Clive recently about what I call the Indification of Nick Drake. Well, it wasn't my original phrase, actually. A friend of mine called it. And again, Nick gets kind of put in a little kind of, the damaged, tortured artist syndrome, isn't it? I mean, again, I play with that in the
Yeah.
book, as you'll know, where I have people talk about, there's far more to him than that. He's not just a
Yeah.
figure.
Well, Joe Boyd said in Uncut recently that he thought if Nick Drake had been successful, if his records had sold and he'd built up a big audience, that he would have been in a better mental state than he was. And so it wasn't like some tortured wallflower who had to go and hide in the corner. And part of his problem was he wasn't successful. That his music didn't actually become his.
And the thing is that music is not commercial. I mean, even now, even with all the cult acclaim and the fact that so many people know who he is, it seems an obvious thing to say, but those records of his, they still don't get in the charts. They're still not big, huge sellers, and he was never commercial.
They get played at funerals, Rob.
So what's the point of that comment? What do you mean?
Well, so I agree that they're not commercial, but I think gradually Nick Drake's, he's ended, his songs have started to be played at people's funerals that discovered him probably later than the 70s, but that the music gradually has seeped into people. And I've been to a series of funerals where his songs have been played, and it's been very interesting that's been chosen. And felt apt to someone's life, sum someone's life up with a Nick Drake song.
But I'll imagine it seems a very strange avenue to go down this, but I'll imagine far more people have Angel by Robbie Williams.
Robbie Williams.
But I don't know.
Right,
yes, well, he does. No, not to be facile, because I don't want to sleep there. Yes, well, you do find your audience, don't you? You find your people, and Nick Drake has found his people. There still aren't a giant, huge amount of them. He would have never played the classic stage on the Sunday afternoon at Glastonbury sort of thing.
No.
And there is always some. I mean, I'm fascinated by Nick's lyrics in that when they're similar but different to Syd's in that they are kind of obscure, but you have to go and join him in his world rather than him come to you. They're not kind of reaching out lyrics at all, I don't think. I mean, everyone, talks about, fame is but a fruit tree. But I find that one of his more adolescent kind of sentiments, to be honest. There are all kinds of lines that resonate in those songs that are beautiful to me. They have a 19th century lyricism to them,
It's almost like he's writing about his own life, but in code.
Yes, it's code, isn't it? Exactly. And it's the codifying that fascinates me. Now, and you can't always crack that code, of course. And what would you gain if you did? But you're right to use that word. There's a kind of code. They have their own inner logic, which sometimes you get a glimpse of and can understand where he's coming from. But other times that inner logic does seem quite impenetrable and perhaps known only to him. And also the narrative voice shifts all the time. That fascinates me. There are points where you think, I'm getting a handle on this now. But the next line will be coming from somewhere else entirely. You think, well, who's speaking now? Who's the narrator now? And who's being talked of here? But again, I find that fascinating because it keeps you guessing.
He's a bit like Kate Bush. Good Kate Bush songs can have three different perspectives in one verse in only about 4 or 5 lines. And he's a bit like that.
Yeah. Yes,
but I think the amazing thing
in a parallel world, it would have been quite easy to imagine Kate Bush not being successful, and because they aren't. Again, they're not mainstream records. Even now, when I listen to certain aspects of that second side of Hounds of Love, you think, how did this ever become a massive sale? It's very strange progressive rock,
Rob,
good comparison.
Rob, one of the interesting elements, obviously, is putting two people together. I'm not making a comparison with Steve Martin's play, the play called Picasso at the Lapin Rouge, the Lapin Agile, 1993 play, in which he has Albert Einstein and Pablo Picasso meeting in France. and putting those two great minds together and seeing how they bounce off each other. So as well as finding the individual voices, I think what's interesting to hear from you, if we may, is how then when you put Syd together with Nick, what happens in that chemistry between the two of them?
Yeah, well, and Tom Stoppard did it with Jumpers as well, didn't he? That great
Absolutely.
Tristan Zara, James Joyce, and Lenin would have all met in Zurich in 1960. Yeah, I love the idea of the premise. Well, what I did with Syd and Nick was I threw them together in the very first line of the book. It's hardly a plot spoiler, is it, to tell you what happens in the first line? but my view with that was let's not fanny about here with literary conceits. Let's not have this endless build up to the meeting. In terms of what are they going to say to each other, that's me, the narrator, challenging myself, saying, right, put them at a table in a cafe. It's actually in Kensington Market, the cafe, based on the actual cafe that used to be in Kensington Market, and make them get on with it. And so that's what I did. Right, there you go. They're sitting opposite each other. Where are we going to start? Pass the salt. He passes the salt. And and off we go. And that is me literally making it up as I go along. When you ask the first 6 or 7 pages of that book, when you've had that initial bit of dialogue of them hesitantly starting to talk to each other, you're on the same page as me, because at that point I still have no idea where this book is going, none at all. Yeah.
Did it surprise you where it went then, Rob?
Oh, absolutely. Well,
and that must be exciting actually for that to happen.
It was huge fun. And I was never stuck. I mean, like any writer, you agonize over certain things, you do endless drafts of it. But at no point in this book was I stuck for an idea. I remember it was a lovely day in the summer of, it would have been 2022 when I was writing it. Yeah, it was a lovely sunny day. I remember going into the garden, and I had written about half of it. That's where I think that thought came from. And I thought, right, so we've 38,000 we've written now. We're probably just over halfway through this. Where should we go next? And immediately this little light bulb went on above my head. I know, let's do blah blah blah. And the little light bulb went on at every point. There was never a moment where I actually had to think, oh, blimey, only 3/4 of the way through, but I'm struggling now. There was never a struggle. It was an effortless book to write. In some ways, I surprised myself with that. I mean, I wrote the psychedelia book. It was 250,000 words. It was 225,000. It's 600 pages. The first draft was 300,000 words, and I sent myself bonkers writing that book. That was 4 years of sheer graft and whipping my brain to the consistency of a blancmange, and to write that book, it was torture, but this was the easiest book I've ever written. It really was. I suppose it's partly because I know the subject matter inside out. I know both of them so well, and I know where I can take them fictionally so well. But of course, when you get to that point where you think, oh, I know, let's imagine Nick as, and of course, coming back to what I said earlier about the structure of the book, you don't put that sort of stuff in the first 3 or 4 chapters. You lead the reader in quite gently, but then by the time you get to chapter 12 or 13 and you're more than halfway through the book, you do figure that, well, if the reader's with me this far, they're in it for the long haul now. They'll go with me now. They're in it for the different conceits and the idea. They know where I'm going. Let's throw a curveball or two in now, shall we? And also to stop it getting predictable, because I don't know about you, we've all read books, haven't we, where you get halfway through it and you think, oh, he's running out of steam or she's running out of steam. You can often detect it, can't you? This is the point where the impetus kind of went. And that never happened, because every time I did that, I thought, well, we're going to take this somewhere differently now. So, for example, one of the chapters I loved writing was imagining Nick as an actor. And so I have, Nick's actor diaries, and I did it in diary form, again, which was huge fun to do.
Inspired by his sister, Gabrielle? Sorry? Inspired by his sister, Gabrielle?
Now, what I did, I reversed them, you see. So I make Gay, as I call her in the Gabrielle, as I call her Gay which is her family nickname.
Yes. I
make her the struggling singer, and I make Nick a semi-successful actor. So I reverse them. But having said that, I don't reverse them literally. So I don't have Gay making 3 unsuccessful albums for Ireland and Nick appearing in Crossroads. I don't go the literal route. I have Nick following a different path, and Gay, in fact, having to put out her own album. And also, I make Molly the mother and a retired actress. So the talent that comes down the line in real life, from Molly's songs down to Nick's songs and the phrasing. I make that creative line come down through acting in that chapter. It was huge fun to write. I mean, a lot of it was, but that was one of the chapters in particular. I had so much fun writing that chapter, imagining Nick as an actor. I could, in another parallel world, I could have made the whole book like that. I could have done Nick Drake actor. If ever one of those chapters was going to lend itself to a more full-blown conceit, it was going to be that one, I think. Discuss.
Graham, last question to you.
Well, Unsung, Unsaid by Rob Chapman is one of our top 3 books of the whole year. And part of the reason for that, and part of the reason it's such an extraordinary book, is that it combines a social history of the times, a musical history. It's like a psychological journey. It invents things. And yet it ends up still feeling like a music biography. You end the book feeling you learned a lot about Nick Drake and Syd Barrett. It's an immense achievement for a small book. And there's very few parallels in British music writing history. Maybe Michael Bracewell or John Savage. And there's so many great music writers in Britain, like Graham Thompson or Bob Stanley or Sam Reynolds. But this is a unique book. This is more like something that one of the great contemporary nature writers like Robert Macfarlane would write, rather than a music critic. It's gone way beyond being a music critic, this book. It's a whole new leap in a new adventure.
My influences, no, I won't say influences, my inspirations, such as they are, don't come from other music writers, and certainly not any of the ones you mentioned there. I want to write music like books like Jonathan Meades writes architecture and cookery books. Jonathan Meades is a big inspiration to me, not on his content, but on the way he goes about pursuing his individual voice. And the other one is Roland Barthes, to be honest with you. Roland Barthes was the greatest rock critic, rock music never had. And those are my parallels, actually. I think those two. My influences don't come from other music writers.
Splendid. Well,
yeah. Well, congratulations on an immense achievement, an absolutely brilliant book.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for your kind words and your really astute questions too. Thank you both so much.
Thank you so much. Cheers, Rob.
It was like talking to Proust.
So, Graham, you touch on the fact that this book will feature in your top 3 of the year, and so we'll move quickly onto that subject matter. And let's go with number 3 each, shall we? What's your number 3?
Well, number 3 is a book that you can predict because my loves are my loves. Mark Cousins' Dear Orson Welles and Other Essays, published by Irish Pages and hardback. And again, it's got some similarities with Rob's book, Unsung, Unsaid, in the sense that although Mark is a really successful documentary filmmaker, although documentary is too narrow a word to describe what he does, and ex-director of the Edinburgh National Film Festival, and he did all those brilliant BBC scene-by-scene interview series, a lot of the book about his film life and about his views on films is invented. He invents interviews that never happened with people like, Sergei Eisenstein, D.H. Lawrence, Pier Paolo Pasolini, Stanley Donen. These never happened. And he does it even though he could spend an eternity writing about his real experiences, because he wants to get to the bottom of the subject by imagining their deepest thoughts. So it's a fantastic book, and it's got the voice of Mark. So when you read it, it's like listening to an audiobook. It's brilliant.
So my third choice, Graham, technically came out in 2023, but I didn't get hold of it until 2024. So that might be a bit of a cheat, but forgive me for that. And this is published, I think, by Faber from memory. And it's Jeff Tweedy, as in Wilco and previously Uncle Tupelo.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it's the third book that Jeff's done, actually. And it's published by Faber. And it's called Music That Changed My Life and Life That Changed My Music. And he's looking at bands and individual songs. Now, to one extent, he's looking at it as a songwriter himself, but actually it's more about the impact that it has on people. So it's the gap. It's not that he's judging it as a songwriter from that point of view. It's about how songs have an impact on people and why they live on. So he'll talk about the Beatles. He'll talk about the Undertones. He'll talk about the Ramones. He'll talk about Sitting on the Dock of the Bay. And if I can find that one, which I may not be able to, but there was a line from it that I absolutely loved right at the end of it as I flicked through them. So simply, his finishing line is, this is from Sitting on the Dock of the Bay. He says, sometimes maybe you're better off whistling along with the waves for a while as a way of thinking in life. And I really like that as an image.
It's a good line, very good
which
line.
is exactly what
Yeah.
that song does. And I think we can both picture where that takes us as an image.
Yeah, yeah. No, it sounds a great book.
Graham, you're number 2 after I waffled away
Well,
there.
number 2 is Unsung, Unsaid by Rob Chapman about Syd Barrett and Nick Drake, and it's a fantastic book for all the reasons we just explored with Rob himself. So we need to move to your number 2, I think.
Right. Well, big John Cooper Clarke fan for many, many years, and John actually is no, Dr. John Cooper Clarke, and he even signed. I've got a signed copy of the book here. The book's called What, and it's signed by Dr. John Cooper Clarke, and this is his most recent collection of poetry. It's very much in the familiar style, the scattergun approach, the clever twists of words, social culture, history, nostalgia, modern impact, modern bite. And just from the poem Burnley, let's give you one line from the poem Burnley, because I'll tell you now, and I'll tell you firmly, I don't ever want to go to Burnley. Perfect. The closing poem is a hymn of praise to Sheffield.
Oh, wow.
He calls Sheffield my second home, sweet swinging home. And it's a beautifully evocative image of Sheffield. So I have always enjoyed Cooper Clarke. We've met him, both of us have met him more than once.
Yeah, but he hasn't kissed you in the neck, Charles, like he kissed me in the neck.
No, he's done that to you, and but he certainly didn't do that to me. But I would. It's just joyous to have him back on a scale of bringing out books now at quite a regular rate again. And as I say, this one's called What, and it's well worth enjoying. It's easy to read. It doesn't take long. Lots of entertainment within it.
Excellent.
Now,
so number one is self-indulgent on my part, because it's not quite so ambitious a book as Mark Cousins or Rob Chapman's, but it's such a brilliant book to read, especially if you're Scottish like me. And it's by Grant McPhee, who did the fantastic Big Gold Dream. And it's called Postcards from Scotland, Scottish Independent Music, 1983 to 1995, Omnibus Press. And it's an oral history of all the great Scottish bands at the time, with interviews with everybody, including the Cocktail Twins, Shop Assistants, Teenage Fan Club, Jesus Mary Chain, Primal Scream. So if you're into that sort of music, it's just non-stop pleasure. And it's really interesting, lots of little details you didn't know.
That's the key. It's the little details that you didn't know that you discover. I think that's what's important in this.
Exactly.
And you and I, you are Scottish anyway, so you've got that bond with that music. But I mean, when I look at my record collections, they all feature all those bands. They're there in my Scottish section. So my choice it's called Rare Singles. It's the latest novel by Benjamin Myers.
Oh yeah,
and it's set in Scarborough, which is why I was intrigued to read it. And the premise behind it is that Dina is a Scarborough lifer, as she's described, trapped with a feckless husband and useless son. Her one release comes at her town's Northern Soul Nights. So what happens here is that invited over from Chicago is Erlon Bucky Bronco, and he's down on his luck and he's lost his beloved wife. He had one Northern Soul hit. This is not a fact. It's a made-up story from that point of view. Although I love the titles that Benjamin Myers keeps coming up for possible singles that weren't singles, but sound like they should have been. And it's a story of two paths coming together, two bruised lives, and coming together over the fact that he's going to perform for the first time in years. He's an old man now, living basically pills to get him through life, and he needs his whiskey as well. And it's just beautifully judged on bring the flowering of him, the reflowering of him, and also for her to realize just time to get rid of her ghastly husband. It's also, I think, really astute about Scarborough itself. So, for example, the Majestic Hotel, as it refers to, is of course not the Majestic Hotel, it's the Grand. And we know it's the Grand, but it gets called the Majestic. And it's fair enough to do that. There's also an indirect reference to a certain legendary figure in Scarborough who was the Ice Cream King. But it's not, again, his name is changed rather than actually being what it is. But you know who it is.
Yeah.
And he does that.
Excellent.
The authenticity with which he writes about the Grand as it really is, but the Majestic, with the windows always being closed, with the herring gulls the impact that they have on everybody, not least because they're always hovering in the windows. And indeed, the herring gulls are as vital a part of the story actually as the human side of it. And it's rare that Scarborough features in a story. I mean, yes, in one of the versions of Little Voice, Mark Herman sets his film version in Scarborough, but it's not a place that's actually used as often as you might think as being seen as a place that's the kind of last chance saloon of life, which is the image of Scarborough. And I always think it would suit having more television and film being made there, and indeed books set there. So this is what Benjamin has done. He's a Northeasterner, but he has a very strong sense of Yorkshire within this piece. And so I thoroughly recommend that as well. Rare Singles, it's called, by Benjamin Myers, published by Bloomsbury.
Isn't that strange that our top two books are rather our twin number ones? One's set in Yorkshire and one's set in Scotland. Who would have guessed that one?
I mean, I was drawn to the fact that this was set in Scarborough. I was just fascinated to see how Scarborough would be used in a story. And I think he does it really, really well. He evokes, I mean, I'd like to think I know Scarborough well because I was in school there, of course, and then I've covered plays there for so many years. And I go to the coast regularly, and I'm always in Scarborough, obviously Filey, Whitby, whatever. But I've got a long history with Scarborough. It's part of my soul as a place. So that's why I was equally fascinated on that level to actually see how it worked through a novel. And full credit to Benjamin Myers for doing that so evocatively.
You can't beat the Yorkshire coastline and the seaside towns. They're absolutely extraordinary.
I agree, and yet I appreciate the Welsh coastline. I appreciate the Scottish coastline. I appreciate the Northumbrian coastline. Beautiful.
There are other coastlines available.
You've been listening to the podcast Two Big Egos in a Small Car. Your hosts were Graham Chalmers and Charles Hutchinson. This was a Baltic sub-production.